I had a stroke on a Tuesday morning in March, right in the middle of making my second cup of coffee. I remember the mug slipping out of my hand. I remember the sound of it hitting the kitchen tile. I remember thinking that's the mug Sandra gave me for our 32nd anniversary, right before everything on my left side stopped working and I went down with it. I was 67 years old. I'd survived 31 years as a high school history teacher, 2 knee replacements, and losing my wife to pancreatic cancer 18 months earlier. I thought the worst of it was behind me. I was wrong. My neighbor, a retired postal worker named Gene who walked his beagle past my house every morning at 7:15, saw me through the kitchen window when he went to check on why my car was still in the driveway at 8. He called 911. He probably saved my life, and he's known me for less than 4 years. My daughter had known me for 39. Her name is Nicole. She lives 22 minutes away from my house in Raleigh. I know the exact distance because I used to drive it twice a week when Sandra was sick, just to see the grandkids, just to have something to look forward to. Nicole knew what I'd gone through during those 18 months. She was there for some of it. Not all of it, but some. When the hospital called her the morning of my stroke, she arrived 4 hours later. I was already stable. The neurologist told her it was a mild ischemic stroke, that I had significant function remaining on my left side, that with therapy I had a strong chance of full recovery. She nodded. She asked about my insurance coverage. She did not hold my hand. She stayed for 40 minutes and said she had to get back because her husband Marcus had a work thing that evening and she needed to be home for the kids. I watched her walk out of that hospital room and I told myself she was just scared. That's what you do when you love someone and they're suddenly lying in a hospital bed with monitors beeping. You tell yourself they're just scared. They just don't know how to handle it. I gave her that. I should have known better. Let me back up, because none of this started in that hospital room. Sandra and I built a good life. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but we were careful. We bought our house in 1989 for $112,000. We paid it off in 2011. By the time Sandra passed, the house had been appraised at just over $400,000. We also had a joint investment account, a modest IRA, and Sandra's life insurance payout, about $90,000, which I kept in a separate savings account because I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt like hers. Nicole knew about all of it. She and Marcus had been struggling financially for a few years. He'd left a stable job in IT to start some kind of marketing consultancy that never quite took off, and they'd refinanced their house twice. I'd helped when I could, $20,000 in 2019 when they were behind on their mortgage, $12,000 in 2021 when Marcus's car gave out, and they needed a replacement. I didn't ask to be paid back. Sandra would have done the same. That was just family. But something shifted after Sandra died. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice a draft in a house. You don't see where it's coming from. You just start feeling cold. Nicole began calling more often, which at first felt like love. She'd ask how I was doing, how the house was holding up, whether I'd thought about what I wanted to do long term. I didn't understand what she meant by that at first. Then she started bringing Marcus to Sunday dinners, which she hadn't done regularly in years, and the conversations always seemed to drift toward real estate, how the market was strong, how a lot of people my age were moving to something smaller and easier to manage, how there was a lovely 55 and older community out near Cary that Marcus had looked at for his own parents. I told her I liked my house. I planted every tree in that backyard. Sandra's rose bushes were still along the fence. I told her I wasn't ready to think about moving. She smiled and said of course she was just bringing it up because she cared. 3 weeks after my stroke, while I was still doing inpatient occupational therapy, Nicole arrived with a folder. I was sitting up in the bed, working on grip exercises with a foam ball, when she came in and sat down and set the folder on the tray table in front of me without saying what it was. She started talking in that voice she'd been using more and more, very calm, very even, like she was explaining something obvious to someone who was having trouble keeping up. She said that given what had happened, it made sense to start thinking seriously about my situation. She said the house was a lot for one person to manage, especially now. She said she and Marcus had done some research, and if I were to sell and downsize into something more appropriate, the equity could be set up in a way that would benefit everyone, make sure I was taken care of, help them stabilize things on their end, maybe set up a fund for the grandkids' education. She pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a power of attorney document, already filled out, with my name on it, assigning authority over my financial and property decisions to Nicole and Marcus, jointly. I looked at that document for a long time. The foam ball was still in my hand. I could feel my left fingers, which I hadn't been sure about just a week earlier. I squeezed the ball slowly. Then I looked up at her and said, "Who prepared this?" She said Marcus had a friend who was a paralegal. I said, "I'm going to need some time to look this over." She said, "Of course." She left the folder. She kissed me on the forehead and said she'd be back Thursday. I waited until she left. Then I called a woman named Diane. Diane Paulson had been my attorney for 11 years. She handled Sandra's estate. She was sharp, direct, and she did not suffer fools, which I respected enormously. When I described the document to her over the phone, there was a pause on her end. She said, "Howard, do not sign anything. I'll be there tomorrow morning." That night, lying in that hospital bed listening to the machines and the hallway noise and the distant sound of a television somewhere down the corridor, I did something I hadn't done much since Sandra died. I thought clearly. I thought about the folder sitting on the tray table. I thought about the 20,000 and the 12,000 and the years of Sunday dinners where I'd tried to pretend I didn't notice that Marcus never asked about my week, only about the house, only about what I was planning. I thought about Nicole standing in this room 40 minutes after I'd had a stroke and asking about insurance. I thought about Jean's beagle stopping in front of my kitchen window. I thought, the people who show up when you're on the floor are not always the people whose names are on your paperwork. Diane arrived at 9 the next morning with her legal pad and her reading glasses and an expression I can only describe as professionally offended. She looked over the power of attorney document, asked me several questions, and then set it down on the tray table like it was something unpleasant she didn't want to touch for too long. She said, "This is not an elder care document, Howard. This is a liquidation instrument." She explained what it meant in plain terms. If I signed it, Nicole and Marcus would have the legal authority to sell my house without requiring my signature on each transaction. They would manage my accounts. They would make financial decisions on my behalf. And given that I had recently suffered a neurological event, it would be very difficult for me to challenge those decisions later if I claimed I hadn't fully understood what I was agreeing to. I told her I hadn't signed it. She said, "Good." Then she said, "Tell me what you want your situation to look like. Not what's easy, what you actually want." I told her I wanted to stay in my house. I wanted to protect what Sandra and I had built. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, actually happened, not a mild stroke, but the real thing, my assets went where I chose, not where someone else decided. She said, "Then let's build that." Over the next 2 weeks, while I was finishing rehabilitation, Diane restructured everything. We established a revocable living trust in my name. The house went into the trust. The investment account went into the trust. Sandra's insurance money, which I had finally decided to use for something meaningful, went into the trust. The successor trustee, the person who would manage everything if I became incapacitated or died, was not Nicole. It was my former colleague and closest friend, a man named Paul who had taught chemistry at the same high school for 26 years, had known Sandra since before Nicole was born, and who I trusted with my life in the most literal sense. We also named a secondary trustee, Diane's firm itself, as a professional backup. I kept Diane's card in my shirt pocket for the rest of my hospital stay. Nicole came back on Thursday as promised. She sat down. She smiled. She glanced at the folder, which I had moved to the windowsill. She asked how I was feeling. I said better every day. She asked whether I'd had a chance to look at the documents. I said yes, I had. She asked what I thought. I said I'd had my attorney review them. The smile didn't disappear exactly, it just went tight, like a rubber band pulled to the edge of snapping. She asked why I felt I needed an attorney for a family matter. I said because it wasn't a family matter, Nicole. It was a legal document. She started to say something about how she and Marcus were just trying to help, how this wasn't about money, how she was worried about me being alone in that house, how the neighborhood wasn't what it used to be, how a man my age after a stroke really needed. I said her name once, quietly. She stopped. I said, I know what the document was. Diane explained it to me. I'm not going to sign it, and I want you to know that I've already made arrangements with my attorney to protect the house and the accounts. Everything is set up. You don't need to worry about any of it anymore. The room got very still. She asked what kind of arrangements. I said I'd rather not get into the details, but everything was structured the way I wanted, and it was legally documented, and it was not going to change based on a conversation. She looked at me for a long moment. I could see her working through it, trying to figure out how much I knew, what exactly I'd done, whether there was still some angle she hadn't considered. Then she said, I can't believe you treat me like this after everything I've done. And I felt something in me go very quiet, not angry, not hurt, just quiet in the way a house gets quiet after a storm has passed through it and rearranged everything. I said, What have you done, Nicole? She didn't answer that. She picked up her purse. She said she needed some time. She said she hoped I would reconsider once I was home and thinking more clearly. She said Marcus was very upset. She walked out. I got home 17 days after the stroke. Gene was in his driveway when the medical transport van pulled up, and he walked over and helped carry my bag inside without being asked. He stayed for an hour to make sure I was settled. He brought a casserole that his wife Ellen had made. I sat at my kitchen table, the new mug already in the cabinet, the broken one gone, and I ate Ellen's casserole and I looked out at the backyard and Sandra's rose bushes, which had started budding despite everything. Paul came by that weekend. We sat on the back porch for 3 hours. He didn't bring a casserole. He brought 2 bottles of a very good IPA from a brewery we'd both liked for years. And we talked about Sandra and about the stroke and about Nicole. And at some point I said out loud that I was grieving 2 things at once. The wife I'd lost and the daughter I thought I'd had. And Paul just nodded and didn't try to fix it, which was exactly the right thing to do. The hard part isn't the legal documents. Diane handled those. The trust is solid. Paul knows what he's doing. I'm not worried about the house or the money. The hard part is the Tuesday mornings, the ones where I'm making my coffee and I think about calling Nicole to tell her something. A story about one of my old students, or something I saw on the news, or just the nothing things you call your daughter to say. And then I remember the folder on the tray table, and I put the phone down. I don't hate her. I've thought about whether I do, and I don't. She's my daughter, and whatever calculations she made in those weeks after my stroke, I believe part of it came from fear and financial desperation and a husband who'd convinced her that this was just being practical, just being smart, just protecting the family. I've seen that story before. It doesn't make it right, but I understand it. What I cannot do is pretend it didn't happen. Nicole called me 6 weeks after I got home. It was the first time since she'd walked out of the hospital room. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said Marcus had finally admitted that they were in serious financial trouble, behind on 2 credit card accounts, another round of mortgage strain. The consultancy effectively finished. She said she was sorry. She said she should have just been honest with me instead of going about it the way they did. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I know you're struggling. I'm not going to let you lose your house, Nicole. I'll help the way I've always helped. But there are things I need you to understand. I told her that the power of attorney document had ended something. Not permanently, maybe, but it had ended the version of our relationship where I assumed the best without paying attention. I wasn't going to do that anymore. If she needed money, she could ask me directly. I would consider it. I might say yes. I might say no. But the days of managing me around the edges were done. I told her I had restructured everything with my attorney and I was not going to share the specifics, but I wanted her to know that the house was protected and the decisions about it were mine and mine alone for as long as I was capable of making them, and I'd taken steps to make sure that capability was documented and legally verified, so there would be no gray area. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, do you still love me?" I said, "You're my daughter. That doesn't go away." That's not what I asked. I thought about that for a second. About the stroke and the folder and the 40-minute hospital visit. About Jean's beagle and Paul's IPA and Ellen's casserole. About Sandra's rose bushes budding in the backyard like they had no idea what kind of winter it had been. "Yes," I said, "I do. But love isn't the same as trust, Nicole. And right now I need some time with both of those things before I can promise you either one." She said she understood. I don't know if she did, but she said it. We talk now, occasionally. She comes over on some Sundays. The grandkids run through the backyard and crash into Sandra's rose bushes, and I don't say a word about it. Marcus stays home, which is fine with me. We haven't found our way back to where we were, and I'm not sure that place exists anymore. But I'm still in my house. My house. The one with the kitchen tile where the mug broke. The one with the backyard Paul and I sit in on warm evenings. The one Sandra and I paid off together, $112,000 in 1989, and filled with 32 years of an ordinary, irreplaceable life. Nobody signs that away while I'm still breathing. Nobody. The mug that broke on my kitchen floor that Tuesday morning was just a mug, but it cracked something else open too. Something I'd been too comfortable to look at clearly for years. I used to believe that loving someone generously meant giving without keeping score. Sandra and I were raised that way. You help your family. You don't make it transactional. You trust that the people who carry your last name will show up when it counts. For most of my life, that belief cost me nothing. And then one morning I went down on the kitchen tile and found out exactly what it had cost me all along. Here's what I understand. Now that I didn't fully understand then, the consequences of how we treat people don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, the way interest does. Nicole didn't become someone who could walk into a hospital room and ask about insurance coverage in the same breath as asking if her father was okay. She became that person slowly, over years, in all the small moments where I stepped back and let things pass because I didn't want conflict. Because I loved her. Because I thought love was supposed to smooth everything over. It doesn't. Love without honesty just delays the reckoning. What saved me wasn't luck. It was Diane, who had been paying attention to legal documents for 11 years and recognized in 60 seconds what that folder actually was. It was Paul, who showed up on my back porch without an agenda. It was Jean, who walked his beagle past my window every morning and noticed when something was wrong. None of those people were there by accident. I had built those relationships over decades by being straight with people, by showing up when they needed me, by not pretending. That's the only reason I had a safety net when the floor gave out. I think about the choices Nicole made in those weeks, and I don't think she sat down one day and decided to become someone who would take advantage of her father. I think she let fear and financial pressure and a husband with bad ideas do the thinking for her. One small compromise at a time, until she was standing in a rehabilitation facility, pushing a legal document across a tray table at a man who was still learning to grip a foam ball. She didn't get there overnight, and that's the part that should frighten any of us, how gradually we can drift from who we mean to be if we stop paying attention to our own character. What I had to find, lying in that hospital bed, was the kind of clear-eyed thinking that doesn't come from anger or hurt, but from knowing exactly what you value and refusing to let circumstances make that decision for you. That's harder than it sounds when you're scared and alone and your left side isn't working right. But it's the only thing that actually protects you, not the legal documents, not the trust, not Diane's phone number in your shirt pocket. Those are just tools. The real protection is knowing your own mind well enough that nobody can talk you out of it. I gave Nicole a path back, Not because I've forgotten what she did, but because writing someone off entirely is its own kind of giving up, and I'm not ready to give up on my daughter. But I gave it to her with open eyes this time. That's the difference. The love didn't change. The clarity did. Sandra's rose bushes are blooming again. I didn't plant them this spring. They just came back on their own, the way things do when the roots are deep enough. I think about that a lot.